You once thought you had met him when your eyes welled up before the glowing altar, when your hands rose in a sea of worshipers, when the song soared and your heart beat like it might burst. But when the night fell, when the room held only your breath, a question still whispered through the silence. I am here, but you, where are you? The voice didn't thunder from the sky. It came from the marrow. From that corner of memory you thought you'd buried. It wasn't lightning. It wasn't wind. It was the sound of quiet footsteps through a garden. In the cool of day, like it was thousands of years ago, when God didn't seek man in a cathedral, but in tangled brush, didn't ask, "Why did you sin?" He asked, "Where are you hiding?" Let me tell you something the world has forgotten. Meeting God never begins with a sermon. It begins in stillness where he touches the wound we dare not name. Tonight, I invite you back to the first garden, where humankind first heard the voice of God after the fall, where he did not shout from a temple, but whispered from the leaves, a story that will take you from the thorns to the altar, from tears to holy fire, from the first question ever asked to the final face-to-face with the Creator. The ritual begins. The voice is opening the gate. Breathe in, close your eyes. He's still asking, "Where are you?" It was sunset. There were no clocks, no bells to mark the hour, but creation knew. The trees shivered, the wind changed course, the sky bent low as if holding its breath. Adam knew too, and he ran. Those footsteps familiar, steady, echoed through the garden as they always had. But today, each step on the fallen leaves drove his soul deeper into a fear he'd never known. For the first time in all of history, a human heard the voice of God and was afraid. He pulled his wife into the thicket. His breath quickened. His palms grew damp. Even the leaves trembled as if they, too, knew something had broken. The separation had begun. God came, not with wrath, not with thunder, only a voice low, warm, resonant as if echoing from the edge of the universe. "Adam, where are you?" It wasn't a question of location. It was a summons for a soul that had wandered from itself. A wake-up call in the dark. A voice echoing across the time, across space, across the dust of all humanity. Adam said nothing. Something caught in his throat. Not because he didn't know where he was, but because he couldn't face who he had become. And so, the first words ever spoken by fallen man were not, "I'm sorry," but, "I heard you walking in the garden, and I was afraid, so I hid." Fear had replaced intimacy, and that was humanity's first disease. From that moment on, every time the divine drew near, he always began with a question. Not because he didn't know, but because we had forgotten how to recognize ourselves. "Where are you?" was no longer a question for Adam alone. It was for the one hiding behind moral fig leaves, for the faithful churchgoer whose heart has drifted far from Eden, for the soul buried beneath calendars, screens, and city lights, yet silently thirsting in a desert within. That question has never stopped echoing. It passed through time, through the wilderness where Elijah lay, spent, through the night where Jacob wrestled his own name, through the cave where Moses removed his sandals, through the blinding storm that brought Saul to his knees on the Damascus road, and into every silent evening where you sit alone, scrolling through your phone, not sure what you're even looking for. Have you ever heard those footsteps? Not loud, not threatening, just present. So present it made you want to run, because you knew if you stopped, if you stayed quiet long enough, you'd hear it. "Where are you?" It isn't a rebuke, it's an invitation. Because the first true encounter between God and mankind didn't begin with fire, or miracle, or law. It began in a garden, in the cool of day, with a creator who didn't demand, but simply asked, "Are you still there? Do you still want to meet me, or just keep running?" And from that day on, meeting God was no longer a ritual. It became a return. Not a journey to a temple, but a step out from where you've been hiding. A return that begins with a single answer not from your feet, but from your heart. Where are you? And the soul is still trembling, still waiting for that answer. Even now, Elijah once called down fire from heaven. He stood on a mountaintop, facing 850 false prophets before a nation that had forgotten God's name. And when he prayed, the fire fell, consuming the altar, vaporizing the water, devouring every trace of doubt. The people fell on their faces and cried, "The Lord, He is God." A moment of glory, a victory unquestionable. But just hours later, Elijah ran. He fled a queen's threat. He fled the mission he'd just fulfilled. He fled the very light he had brought down to earth. Beneath a broom tree, he sat down and asked to die. "I've had enough. Take my life." The prophet of fire, now a man burned out in the desert. Have you ever been strong and still worn thin? Have you ever been used by God and still felt like dead weight? Elijah collapsed into sleep, and then an angel came. Not with thunder, but a gentle touch. "Get up and eat. The journey is too much for you." He ate, then slept again. And the angel returned, not scolding, but waiting. Soft, patient. Not everyone understands this before God speaks to your soul. He may tend to your body, not with a sermon, but with bread. Not with a miracle, but with care. After 40 days walking in silence, Elijah reached God's mountain Horeb. He found a cave, crawled inside. This time, he wasn't running from death. He was running because he no longer knew what to live for. And in the cold darkness of that cave, God asked, "Elijah, what are you doing here?" The same tone as in Eden, not searching for a location but for a condition, not chasing the hidden but calling the broken. Elijah poured out his heart. "I've been zealous for you, but they've torn down your altars, killed your prophets, and now I'm the only one left. They're trying to kill me too." He was venting his pain and quietly submitting his resignation. "I've done all I can. I'm alone. I'm empty." God didn't argue, didn't comfort. He simply said, "Go out and stand on the mountain before me." Then the earth began to unravel. A mighty wind tore through the cliffs. But God was not in the wind. An earthquake split the ground, but God was not in the quake. Fire blazed through the rocks, but God was not in the fire. 3 wonders, 3 signs that once made men tremble, and then a gentle whisper. No chant, no blinding light, no overwhelming power, just a thin breath slipping through the cracks of a weary soul. And Elijah, upon hearing it, wrapped his cloak over his face, not out of fear, but because he knew this was him. Because God doesn't only arrive in victory, He shows up in exhaustion. He's not just thunder atop the mountain, He is the warmth in the cold stone. And the question came again. "Elijah, what are you doing here?" Same words. But this time, the voice didn't come from fire, or wind, or quake. It came from the closest distance between God and man. Breath. God didn't chastise him. He didn't send him home. He handed him a new assignment. "Go. Your mission isn't over. You will anoint kings. You will call forth your successor. You thought you were the last, but 7,000 remain who have not bowed to Baal." Elijah thought he was the final one, but he was simply the next one called. God didn't use fire a second time to convince him. He used a whisper to remind him. You don't need to shout to be heard. You don't need to perform miracles to stay. You don't need to prove your worth to be loved. God didn't wait for Elijah to shine again. He only asked him to step out of the cave and listen to the whisper that wounds deeper than any storm. What are you doing here? Maybe that's the question waiting for you too. When you're worn out, when you once burned bright, when you once believed, and now there's only breath and a question. Not to end you, but to begin again, with a whisper that is holy. That night, no one was watching. No family, no followers, no music, no temple. Just a man alone by the river Jabbok. Jacob, his name meant deceiver, a name he carried from the womb, when he grabbed his brother Esau's heel. His whole life, he knew one way to survive: take, trick, run. He stole the birthright, deceived a blind father to steal the blessing, fled Esau's rage, then ran again from Laban after years of deceiving and being deceived. And now, he was about to face everything he'd fled. Esau was coming, with 400 men. No one knew if he came to embrace or to kill. Jacob sent gifts. He prayed, he split camps, he made plans. But deep down, he knew. No one can run forever. No one can hide from themselves forever. And that night, when he was finally alone, when everything had run out, a man appeared. No greeting, no introduction, just impact. The scripture doesn't name him. Only this they wrestled. Not for minutes, but the entire night. It wasn't a vision. It wasn't a dream. It was sweat. It was dirt. It was bones grinding in the dark. A real fight, no metaphor, no parable. And Jacob didn't run. For the first time in his life, he held on instead of fleeing. And then it happened. The man touched his hip. Just a touch and the joint gave way. Pain, collapse, no more strength. Jacob couldn't fight, couldn't brace, couldn't flee. The struggle became a clinging. He wasn't battling anymore. He was holding on. Not to win, but because he couldn't lose the only thing left that felt real. Then the voice spoke. "Let me go. The day is breaking." Jacob whispered through clenched teeth. "I won't let you go unless you bless me." The man asked, "What is your name?" A question that seemed unnecessary but cut like a blade through the past. Jacob, the old name, the old life, the root of every lie. For the first time, he spoke the truth about who he was. And the man replied, "Your name will no longer be Jacob, but Israel, for you have wrestled with God and with men, and have prevailed. No one prevails over God, but Jacob had prevailed over himself, not through strength, but through surrender." The sun rose, and Jacob limped across the river. That wounded hip became a mark. That limp became proof. He had encountered God not through ecstasy, but through a break that shook him to his core. And that's what the world forgets. True encounters aren't always sweet. Sometimes they hurt, so you finally stop pretending. Jacob was never the same, not because he was healed, but because he no longer hid. Years later, when the nation of Israel looked back at its father, they didn't see a flawless man. They saw one who limped beside God, each step a reminder. The limp remains, but so does the heart. Maybe you are there now, in a night no one sees, fighting not to win, but because you don't know what else to do. No words, no doctrine, just holding on. And if God asked you tonight, "What is your name?" would you dare answer with a truth stripped of makeup? Because you can only be renamed once you've confessed the old name. You can only be blessed once you've let go of the leg that kept leading you the wrong way. And you can only become Israel once you stop pretending to be someone else. 40 years, each morning dust, each night sheep, in the desert of Midian, where no dreams remained and no glory lingered. Moses had learned how to live without miracles. He had once been a prince of Egypt, once killed for justice, once believed he was born to set his people free. But now, he was a shepherd, a fugitive, a shadow living quietly in a land forgotten by history. And it was there in the silence of obscurity that God chose to touch him. That day was nothing special, no holy feast, no moment of prayer, just another day like thousands before it. Until Moses saw a bush on fire. Nothing strange about fire. Midian was dry, full of wind. Fires burned fast, turned everything to ash. But this fire didn't consume. The flames leapt, but the leaves stayed green. The light blazed, but the shape held its form. Moses heard no voice. He simply saw and chose to come closer. And it was in that moment when he turned aside to look that God spoke. Not when the fire burned, but when the man paid attention. "Moses, Moses," twice called, not for emphasis but for identity. He answered, "Here I am." Then came the thunderous quiet. "Do not come closer. Take off your sandals, for the place where you are standing is holy ground." Not holy by geography, not holy by temple walls, holy because of presence. And when God is present, even the ordinary becomes sacred. He didn't ask Moses to kneel. He didn't demand a confession. Just to remove his sandals, take off the protection, shed the leather thickened by desert years, strip away the layer that kept him from direct contact with holiness. Because this wasn't an intimate encounter. This was a consecration, a fire that would burn away the past without burning the man. And God said, "I am the God of your father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, the God of Jacob." No title, just history. Because this moment was not an isolated spark. It was the next flame in a long river of blood and promise. Moses hid his face, afraid to look. He who had once walked among thrones, who studied the wisdom of Egypt, now trembled before a burning bush. And God said, "I have seen the suffering of my people. I have heard their cry, and I have come down." Moses might have exhaled. God is here. He will deliver. But then the voice cut like a blade. "Now go. I am sending you to Pharaoh to bring my people out of Egypt." That moment a tear in reality. Moses, the runaway, the murderer, the stammering, stumbling man. Delivering an entire nation from the most powerful empire on earth. He protested. "Who am I to go?" God didn't answer with Moses' resume, didn't list his skills. He simply said, "I will be with you." The calling was never about capacity, it was always about presence. Because when God is with you, even a bush can burn and not be consumed. And when God calls, He does not wait for readiness. He comes into the very place you thought you were forgotten. Midian was not punishment, it was preparation. And the burning bush was not a dazzling miracle. It was a whisper that destiny was ready to erupt. You may be in your own Midian, a dry land, repetitive, full of regret. No temple, no dream. But if you see something strange, if there's fire that doesn't consume, if part of you is aflame but still whole, don't turn away. Step closer, take off your shoes and listen. Because maybe, on the day you thought most ordinary, God is waiting to say, "I have seen, I have heard, and I am sending you." It was noon, the hottest hour of the day, when the sun scorched everything beneath it, and no one ventured out unless they had to. That was when she came, carrying a jar to the well. She knew what time to choose. The hour when no one would be there. No greetings, no glances, no whispers behind her back, because she knew exactly who she was in the eyes of that town. 5 husbands, and the man she lived with now wasn't one of them. A history no shade of stone could fully hide. But that day, someone was waiting. Not a Samaritan, not a local. A Jew, and that alone was strange. He didn't stand, didn't preach. He sat, tired, looked at her and said, "Give me a drink." She froze. Jews didn't speak to Samaritans. Men didn't speak alone with women in public. And no one asked for water from the hands of a woman like her. "You're a Jew. I'm a Samaritan woman. How can you ask me for a drink?" She wasn't just naming ethnicity. She was naming the boundary she believed defined her worth. He didn't respond like a rabbi, didn't teach from the law. He simply said, "If you knew who was speaking to you, you would have asked. And I would have given you living water." Living water, a phrase too strange to trust. She half smiled. "You have no bucket, and the well is deep. Where do you get this living water?" The voice came again, light as wind. "Whoever drinks this water will thirst again. But whoever drinks what I give will become a spring welling up to eternal life." She paused. "Then give me that water, so I won't have to come back here again." Half joke, half hunger. But Jesus wasn't there to quench her thirst. He came to open the jar she had sealed with shame. "Go call your husband." Silence. Her chest tightened. "I have no husband." "You're right. You've had 5. And the man you're with now isn't your husband." No judgment, no disgust. Just truth gently unveiled. She didn't run. Because for the first time, someone knew everything and didn't leave. He didn't touch her, didn't look at her like damaged goods, didn't pity her. He just sat there, with water, with eyes, with an invitation beyond all doctrine. The hour is coming, and is now here, when true worshippers will worship the Father in spirit and in truth. No need for a temple in Jerusalem, no sacred mountain. Just truth, and she had just spoken it. The Messiah, when he comes, he will explain everything. "I am he, the one speaking to you." No wind, no thunder, no angelic choir, just a sentence that shattered centuries of chains. She left her jar behind and ran to the village. No more hiding, no more silence, no more shame. "Come see a man who told me everything I've ever done," and didn't walk away. She, the one who once avoided every eye, became the first to declare the Christ. Not through theology, not through training, but through a single honest story. "I was seen, I was known, and I was not rejected." That well didn't just hold water, it held a gate. A path back to dignity for a soul once dried up. A doorway through which a woman once gossiped about became the first spark of New Testament revival. Because when Jesus meets you at the very point of your shame and still sits beside you, without condemnation, without turning away, you don't have to hide anymore. You just leave the old jar and run with a story no one can deny. "I met a man who knew everything about me, and still called me by name." Not everyone comes to God with trembling feet. Some arrive on horseback, proud, certain, convinced they are right. Like Saul, he wasn't weak, he wasn't searching. He thought he already had the truth. A man of the law, highly educated, fiercely devout. And with that zeal, he hunted followers of Jesus, dragged them from homes, imprisoned them, signed their deaths. He stood still, watching with cold eyes as Stephen was stoned to death, unshaken. And then, one day, on the road to Damascus, while Saul was full of holy purpose, burning with self-righteousness, a light brighter than the sun struck him down. Saul fell. No one pushed, no one hit, just light and a voice. "Saul, Saul, why are you persecuting me? Not why are you wrong? Not why are you killing? But why are you persecuting me?" A question that split the illusion in half. Saul thought he was defending the faith, but in truth, he was attacking the very one he claimed to serve. "Who are you, Lord?" I am Jesus, the one you are persecuting." In that moment, every definition shattered. Jesus, alive! And if he lived, then Saul had been fighting against God himself. He wasn't struck dead. He wasn't cursed. He was made blind. 3 days. No sight, no food, no words. Only silence, only darkness. In that darkness, all his knowledge, all his power, all his prestige turned to dust. A man who once saw everything through logic had to go blind to finally see. Because sometimes, to reveal himself, God must first turn off the old vision. Elsewhere, a man named Ananias, unknown, Ordinary was called. "Go find Saul, lay hands on him. He is my chosen vessel." Ananias hesitated. Everyone knew Saul. But God wasn't sending him to debate, only to touch, to transfer, to rekindle light. When Ananias laid hands on Saul, something like scales fell from his eyes, and the light returned. But now, he was no longer Saul. He was Paul, no longer the hunter of believers, but the messenger of the gospel to the ends of the earth. His wounds were no longer shame. They were testimony. "I was once blind, but now I see." Paul never boasted of greatness. He always said, "I am the chief of sinners." Not out of guilt, but because he knew only those who've collided with the light truly understand the cost of seeing. Maybe you're not on horseback, not hunting anyone, but you're riding something achievement, your own certainty, a noble idea. And God doesn't throw you down in anger, He stops you in love. The fall is not to end you. It's to turn you. The blindness is not punishment. It's the first real chance to see. Because many have sight but never look, knowledge but no encounter, belief but no face-to-face. And if today, on your road, a sudden light breaks in, if something halts your plans, disrupts your rhythm, leaves you breathless, don't ignore it. It could be God interrupting you not to destroy, but to rescue you from the very path you thought was holy. Saul fell but rose with a new name, a new vision, and a mission that would turn the world upside down. And maybe you are on your own road to Damascus, where the fall won't be your end, but your beginning. The room wasn't grand. It wasn't gilded like the temple. It didn't shake like Sinai. Just a quiet upper room, somewhere above the street, where the fearful had locked themselves away. They weren't priests. They weren't preachers. They were fishermen who had once run, rough hands, hearts still aching from the loss of their teacher. Jesus had risen. They had seen him, heard him speak, but it still wasn't enough. Because knowing the resurrection is not the same as living like you've risen. And then Jesus said something strange. Don't go yet. Wait. Wait for power from on high. Wait for something you've never known but can't live without. So they waited, not knowing what would come, only holding to a promise. I will send the Comforter, the Spirit of truth. And then it happened. A sound like rushing wind, but no doors opened. Tongues of fire appeared, but no one burned. They rested on each one. The fire from heaven the same that once lit up a bush, that consumed Elijah's altar, that crowned Mount Sinai, now came to rest on people. Not just Moses, not just Jeremiah, Isaiah, or Daniel, but all of them, all ages, all trades, all histories. The scripture says they were all filled with the Holy Spirit. Not just touched, filled. And when the fire entered, their voices changed, their hearts changed. The room could no longer contain them. Peter, the one who had denied Jesus 3 times because he feared a servant girl, stood up and preached, not with knowledge, but with fire that had just been lit within him. This is what the prophet Joel spoke of. I will pour out my spirit on all people, on sons and daughters, on servants, on the young who see visions, the old who dream dreams. No one left out. It wasn't prophecy anymore. It was burning reality. And from that day forward, the world was never the same. No more mountains. No more waiting for a burning bush. No more caves echoing with divine voice. Because the fire had moved in. It lived in hearts. It burned on the lips of the once voiceless. It shone in the eyes of those who used to only stare at the ground. From one small room, they scattered like living torches, and no one could put them out. The fire wasn't just for miracles, it was for transformation, to love the unlovable, to forgive the unforgivable, to proclaim what no one else dared say. And you don't need to be in Jerusalem. You don't need to wait for Pentecost. All you need is a room, a heart that waits, and one whispered word. Welcome. The Spirit doesn't come to perform. He comes to dwell. No longer atop high mountains, no longer behind the veil of the ark, but inside human hearts with fire that doesn't go out. Maybe you're asking for power, but God is waiting for stillness. Not to meet him with a plan, but with thirst. Fire doesn't need a scream. It just needs someone willing to stand beneath it without running. A heart that says, I don't want a feeling. I want you real. And if today, in the quiet room where you sit, something begins to burn, not in your skin, but in your soul, then know this. The fire has never stopped falling. It has only been waiting for someone ready to receive instead of merely watch. And once that fire ignites within you, you will never walk the same again. In the old days, if you wanted to meet God, you had to go. Up to the temple, up the mountain, up for the feast. You met him through priests, through incense, through the thick veil that separated humanity from holiness. Only the high priest could enter the Holy of Holies, and only once a year. To encounter God was a luxury. Something staged, bloody, bound by offerings and laws that reached into the fingernails. But then the veil tore. When Jesus breathed his last on the cross, the curtain that stood between God and man was torn from top to bottom. Not from earth to heaven, but from heaven down. Meaning it wasn't man who opened the door. God stepped out. And from that moment, the temple changed address. No longer a building, no longer Jerusalem, no longer stone, but flesh and blood and the bodies of those who believe. Paul wrote, "Do you not know that your body is a temple of the Holy Spirit?" That statement didn't just rewrite theology, it redefined identity. We are no longer visitors to God, we are his dwelling place. If we truly believed that, then every breath would be sacred, every thought holy ground, every dark corner of our mind a place God longs to light a flame. But there is a distance. Presence does not always mean intimacy. Like two spouses sharing a home but no longer speaking. Many believers carry the Spirit inside, but never speak to him. We've turned the Holy One into the quiet roommate, a resource when needed, a feeling during worship, a utility instead of a Lord. The Spirit didn't come to serve our emotions. He came to lead, to speak, to correct, to befriend. In Acts, they weren't just filled during a festival. They were led, stopped, sent, redirected. They didn't use the Spirit. They lived like temples with ears listening. Perhaps that's why Paul wrote, "Do not grieve the Holy Spirit," because he is not an energy. He has a mind, emotion, will, and he lives in you. The real question is, do you live with him? Not in church, but in your bedroom, in the car, in bed before sleep, in the small decisions of your day. Do you ask him about what you're thinking? Do you pause when his heart flinches at what you're about to do? Do you sit not to receive, but just to be present? Because real friendship doesn't wait for crises to show up. Maybe what's made your faith feel cold isn't a lack of teaching, but a lack of talking. We've asked the Spirit to fall like he did before, but we forget he never left. He's just been waiting for you to stop, to mute the noise, to hush the hurry and say, I know I'm your temple, but today I don't want you just inside. I want you enthroned here. Because the Spirit doesn't want to live like a tenant. He wants to reign like a loving king. And when you truly let him take his seat at the center of your soul, everything you do will shine different. Not because you preach, but because he burns through you from the inside out. And the world will know. The temple is no longer a place, it's a person. It's you if you dare to let the fire truly burn. In the year King Uzziah died, the people were shaken. A long reign ended, a nation lost its footing, and in the middle of that political collapse, one man walked into the temple. His name was Isaiah, a prophet, a man of words, one who spoke for God. But that day, he didn't come to speak. He came simply to be, perhaps not seeking anything, perhaps expecting nothing, just entering the sacred space as a man trained in ritual might do. And then everything shattered. Not the walls, but his soul. I saw the Lord, high and exalted, and the train of his robe filled the temple. This wasn't symbolic. This wasn't light play, it was real, palpable. Something in the air shook his bones. Above, the seraphim cried, Holy, holy, holy is the Lord of hosts. The whole earth is full of his glory. That sound wasn't a song. It was a trembling, a holy terror. Isaiah didn't clap, didn't kneel by habit. He came undone. Woe is me, I am ruined, for I am a man of unclean lips, and I live among a people of unclean lips, and my eyes have seen the King, the Lord Almighty. He didn't just see God's greatness, he saw himself raw and real in that light. And the first thing to burn wasn't the temple. It was his pride, the belief that he was enough, that he could speak for God without first being scorched. God didn't comfort him with words. He sent a seraph. To the altar, to pick up a live coal, to touch his lips. Not water, not gentle cloth, fire. Because this coal has touched your lips, your guilt is taken away, your sin is atoned for. Cleansing not through avoidance, but through burning. And only after the fire, God asked, Whom shall I send? Who will go for us? No one gets asked before the coal. Only those who let the flame touch their most unclean places ever hear the call that reshapes history. And Isaiah didn't hesitate. Here am I, send me. This was no longer the voice of a preacher. This was the voice of a soul melted down and reforged. Not because he knew the mission, but because he now knew the one who called. Maybe you're in an Isaiah moment. You've been competent, righteous, strong, but something, somewhere, is making you face yourself. Not a fall, a revealing. Not shame, but exposure. And if you let that light remain, if you don't turn away, if you whisper honestly, Lord, I'm unworthy, then maybe a seraph is already flying toward you, coal in hand. Not to destroy, but to transform. God's fire doesn't burn you up. It burns off the pretending. It doesn't make you superhuman. It makes you real. Because only the real can be trusted to speak what no one else dares say. From that day on, Isaiah was no longer a prophet of ritual. He became a prophet of presence. He didn't just hear God. He had seen him, been touched, been undone. And no one can argue with a man who carries fire in his bones. If today you find yourself in the haze in your temple, in your confusion, somewhere between guilt and calling, know this: God hasn't come to extinguish you. He's come to call you from the fire. The question still echoes. Whom shall I send? And only those who have been broken can answer with their whole soul. Here am I, send me. And if you're still here, sitting in the quiet, your heart still tethered to this unfolding, Perhaps your soul has just been touched in the place you thought no one could reach. From the burning bush to the hidden cave, from the well of shame to the light on the road, from a midnight wrestling to the ember on holy lips. We have met him, not a distant deity, but a God who dares to ask, "Where are you?" then waits patiently for the answer. Do you see it now? He doesn't just appear in glory. He steps into shame, into fracture, into the strange silence of souls who have lost their way. Because God doesn't just want to be met, He wants to remain, not just in a church, but in your room, in the way you see yourself, in the conversation no one hears but He does. Here at Tales of Black, each story is not entertainment. It is a ritual of language, an altar built from breath, a reminder that some memories aren't found in books, they're carved into bone and blood. If something stirred in you through this story, don't keep it to yourself. Share it with someone hiding in a cave, with someone shattered along the road, with someone dry at a well, thinking God has forgotten. Subscribe so you don't miss the next ritual. And if you carry a legend, a wound, a memory, leave it in the comments. Because maybe your story is the next to be told. Because God is still asking, the fire is still burning, and this generation still needs someone to step out of hiding and answer with their whole soul. Here I am. Send me.